Well, let me confess, I'm a little nervous. I'm used to speaking to people, but I'm not used to speaking to TV cameras. So if I make a boo-boo, it's broadcast. Well, I think that y'all are here motivated by the fact that there was a recent Jihad attack, and I would like to go over some of my views on that, but also wanted to go over the fact that there is something to be known about a subject called Islam. And I would like to lead you through this because it depends on the Islam that you know is what allows you to reach conclusions. And so let's just start right into this. This is official Islam. Now, official Islam is what we get in the media. It's based on expert opinion. This is very handy because as long as you're going to define something by experts, you can get whatever you want. If you want nice, friendly Islam, you've got that. If you want Islamic State, you have that. So the nice thing about the expert method is you get opinions, you can get what you want. Now, the other thing that the media tells us is that Islam is a religion, and it's the religion of peace. Let me say that I have no interest in the religion of Islam and won't be discussing it tonight at all. The other thing we hear is, well, those are just extremists or radicals. You'll notice that when I get through tonight, I will not be using the term extremist or radical. Oh, I know this Muslim and he says, I don't know, I cannot tell you how many times I've heard this. And the nice thing about this is, once again, if you view the Muslim as an expert, you can get the answer you want, warm and friendly or tough. That most Muslims are moderate, and that moderate Muslims are the real Muslim. And that jihad is an inner struggle. Jihad does not have anything to do with violence and war. And then last but not least, if you violate the rules of official Islam, you will be called a hater, a bigot, a racist, and an Islamophobe. I happen to know this is true. So that's official Islam, and now I'd like to introduce you to another Islam, which I will call fact-based Islam. We need something that is objective. Opinions are nice, but they're like elbows. Everybody's got at least two of them. What we want is something that is objective. And I'm going to lead you through an objective study of Islam. And to do that, I'm going to start with a principle which every Muslim agrees with who's ever lived for 1,400 years. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. This is what I'm going to build the whole foundation of my presentation in front of you. The beauty of this is that every Muslim agrees with this. So we have a foundation which is rock solid. Now, where do we learn about Allah? Well, we learn about Allah in the Quran. You need to know that there are two Qurans. Now, do not go into the bookstore and try to say you want to buy both of them, because every Quran you buy contains both of them in a single binding. But there's an early Meccan Islam and a latter Medinan Quran, and these are extraordinarily different. But you just need to know that there's two different Qurans. And by the way, if you want to, when this lecture is over, give me a business card and I will email you all of the slides for this lecture if you want to, so you don't have to take notes. Okay, now one of the things that strikes people when they read the Quran is its contradictory nature. Here I've given you two verses. You have your own religion and I have mine. Very moderate. I like it. Let there be no compulsion in religion. I like it. Then we have another, which is Surah 8:12. I shall cast terror into the hearts of the kafirs. Kafirs are unbelievers such as myself. Strike off their heads, strike off the very tips of their fingers. Do you notice these two contradict each other? And so that's one of the impressions that people get when they study the Quran, is that it's so contradictory. Which one is the real Quran? I'll give you this answer now. Yes. They're both true. They're both real. Now, there's a rule given in 3 verses in the Quran which establishes a principle of abrogation. The latter verse is better and stronger than the earlier verse. So what this says is that the jihad verse is stronger and better than the earlier tolerant verse. We'll deal a lot more on this. This fits under the heading of dualism. Now then, this is what I'm all about. If you read the Quran, you'll discover something that is missing, which is the ability to practice any of the 5 pillars of Islam. So the Quran itself cannot be the basis of Islam because it does not contain enough material in it to do so. Where do we get the missing material? There are 91 verses in the Quran which state this. Muhammad is the divine human prototype. Muhammad is the perfect human being. Muhammad is the perfect pattern of life. If you follow his life, you can go to paradise, and if you don't, you will definitely go to hell. So, how do we find out about Muhammad? Simple. We have his biography called the Sirah, and we have his traditions called the Hadith. And I've just laid them out here, the Hadith, the Sirah, and the Quran, and you'll notice something which we'll comment on in a bit, which is the Quran looks kind of small, doesn't it? Well, it is. Now then, I'm going to repeat what you've already heard. I do not discuss Muslims other than to point out how they obey or disobey the doctrine of Islam. An example of this method is Islamic State is pure Islam. I do not discuss people, nor do I ask Muslims what Islam means. Because if you're going to do that, there's about 1.5 billion of them, and I don't have time to ask 1.5 billion people any question. So I only ask a question of two people, Muhammad and Allah. Now then, this goes back to the point that if you count the words in the Quran, the Sirah, and the Hadith, you'll discover something. Islam is the doctrine contained in these three books. If it's in these three books, it is Islam. If it's not in these three books, it is not Islam. Got it? Islam is this much Allah and this much Muhammad. Well, that's kind of nice. Because now then all we have to do to really understand the most of Islam is to understand Muhammad. Now Allah is a little confusing, but Muhammad is not confusing at all. So we start our understanding of Islam based on Muhammad. What I'm saying here is Islam is the doctrine found in the Quran, the Sirah, and the Hadith, or said another way, it's Allah plus the Sunnah. The Sunnah is the perfect pattern of Muhammad, or it's Allah and Muhammad, or it's three books, Quran, Sirah, Hadith. And this is what I base everything on. I base everything that I say on these three books. I listen to Muhammad and say what he says. I read the Quran and say what Allah says. Okay? That's my method. Now then, if you start reading these three books and you've done a lot of reading of religious literature around the world, such as I've done, you're immediately struck by something. I'm in that book because I'm a kafir. And the bulk of the Islamic doctrine is about the unbeliever. Now this is rather odd because most religious books, if you read Buddhist sutras, it's about how to be a Buddhist. They barely address the fact that they're a non-Buddhist. They certainly don't fixate on it. But we can see here, and I can't really see in the back enough, that I think it's 64% of the Quran, am I reading that right? 64% of the Quran is about the kafir. 81% of Muhammad's life is him dealing with the kafir. 37% of the Hadith, or the trilogy, Quran, Sirah, Hadith, the three books, over half of it is about you and me. Now then, this is important because all I speak about with Islam is political Islam. I speak about the part of Islam that affects me. I don't comment upon prayer. I don't comment upon the proper attitude when giving the zakat or any other religious things. I don't care if Muslims pray 3 times a day as the Quran says or 5 times a day as the Hadith says. I don't care if Muslims pray towards Mecca or Minnesota. It simply doesn't matter to me. I have no interest in Islamic heaven and I have no fear of Islamic hell. I'm trying to drive this point home. I will not be speaking about the religious doctrine of Islam. I'm going to speak about the part of the doctrine that affects me and possibly you. Now then, the J word, jihad. We run across now a peculiarity of the Quran, which is this. In the Meccan Quran, in the early Quran, there is no jihad, none. But in Medina, the latter Quran, 24% of it is about jihad. This is not a verse or two, as you're told. And talking about interpretation, these figures give you an interpretation. When you read a book and 24% of it is devoted to a subject, what do you think about that? It's important. So that is an interpretation. The Sirah, 67% of it is about jihad. The Hadith, 21% of it is about jihad, which gives us nearly a third of Islamic doctrine is devoted to jihad. It is not a sentence or a verse or two. It is a systemic doctrine. Now then, one of the things that when you read the Quran in particular, well, for that matter, all of them, you discover that in Mecca, at first, the Jews are praised as honored amongst men. But at the very end of the Meccan Quran, there's beginning to be some anti-Jew material. And by the time you get to the Medinan Quran, 17% of the Quran in Medina is devoted to Jew hatred. Okay? And the Sirah, 12%, and the Hadith, nearly 9%. Now, generally considered that the most Jew hatred book would be Hitler's Mein Kampf. You all are familiar with that. Well, I've actually read it, and I went through and measured how much anti-Jew material there was, and it's 7%. The overall trilogy has 9%. Draw your own conclusions. Now then, here's the growth of Islam. Not only have I been a scientist and a college professor, I've run a business. If you run a business, you become quickly introduced to the concept of sales. But if you're not introduced to the concept of sales, you'll be seeking new employment. So I said to myself as a businessman, what did Muhammad's sales career look like? This is a graph of his life based on his results at proselytizing. He preached the religion of Islam for 13 years in Mecca and garnered 150 Arab souls, about 10 a year. He then went to Medina at the insistence of the Meccans, and he became a politician and a jihadist. He averaged an event of jihad in the last 9 years of his life, and he spent 10 of them in Medina. In the last 9 years, he averaged a jihad event every 6 weeks for 9 years. But when he died, the Arabian Peninsula was all Muslim. Conclusions. The religion was not a success. The politics was. All right? Now then, let's review the little charts I've given you. Dualism, because one of the things that drives people up the wall about Islam is, which is it? Well, here we have the answer. Is the Quran about peace? Yes. Is the Quran about jihad? Yes. Does the Quran contain material praising the Jews? Yes. Does it consist of material hating the Jews? Yes. Does it advocate tolerance in religion? Yes. Does it advocate killing those whose religion Islam doesn't like? Yes. We have Muhammad as a religious teacher, and we have Muhammad as a political leader. All of these things, and this is the most difficult concept for you to understand, is this. Islam is dualistic. It always has two versions. It's like having a sink with hot water and cold water. What do you need? Turn it on. This is quite peculiar, and it violates, as a Westerner, you say, well, if two things contradict each other, at least one of them is false. Not so in Islam. They're both true. That is, the Meccan Quran is true, and the Medinan Quran is true. Conclusions. There is such a thing as objective knowledge about Islam. This within itself is startling because everyone else says, well, it all depends on how you interpret it. I know this Muslim and he says. No, I don't want what opinions. These are the facts. If Muhammad speaks, it is true in Islam. If you know someone who says something about Islam that contradicts what Muhammad says, then it's wrong. So why bother with other people? Just go to Muhammad. The doctrine of Islam is political and religious. Islam is a civilizational doctrine. Let me make one thing very clear. If Islam were a religion, I'd be at home in my wood shop. But it is not a religion. It's a complete civilization. There is nothing that you can think of in your daily life that Islam does not have a prescription on. What to wear, what to eat, how to make love, how to marry, how to carry on your daily life. Everything is prescribed in Islam. So it's a civilizational doctrine. The doctrine determines actions by Muslims. A Muslim is supposed to follow the doctrine of Islam. That's the only way I talk about Muslims. I say, well, they're following the doctrine or they're not following the doctrine, but they're supposed to. The other thing is that today, all of the doctrine of Islam is very easy to understand. I was a college professor, and you find two kinds of professors in college. One are those who are erudite and want you to think they're very intelligent, and they may well be. But I was not that kind of professor. I was the kind of professor who loved to make it so that anybody could understand it. And that's what I have done and others have done. I sell Qurans that anyone can pick up and read and understand, and they contain all the verbiage. The Life of Muhammad, which used to be written in the most difficult English I've ever read, is now easy to read. The Hadith are now easy to understand. So that's the other part of the message I bring you. Now then, let's go with this. So, there's objective Islam and there's subjective Islam. Official Islam is subjective. Now then, I want to talk about how we're losing a war. You all may be aware of some things that Islam does and are not. I have no idea. But this is my life. I'm a 74-year-old man with a 72-year-old wife, and we devote our lives to keeping up with what is happening in Islam, and in particular, keeping up with what's happening with it here in Tennessee. I'm going to go over some points with you which you may not be aware of, because they all show how we're not doing it the right way. A 747 leaves Syria. This story was told to me by an Iraqi Christian. It is filled with refugees. It contains one Christian. That's losing. You all have experienced the fact that law enforcement has been in town here. You need to know this, that law enforcement under Obama has been given direct orders via Holder, he was the Attorney General, that henceforth people such as myself would never be allowed to speak to federal agencies. That only those people who are approved by the government can speak to federal agencies, and basically that means approval by the Muslim Brotherhood. I know about this in particular because one of the trainers at the FBI said, Bill, your files were the last ones we purged, because the files were purged of all work by such people as myself. And I told them, I says, look, these are just statistical summaries, just I've just given you, and they said, it is offensive to Islam, they will go. And so my records were purged. The same thing is true here in Tennessee. Under direct orders of Bill Haslam, people such as myself, John Guandolo, Steve Coughlin, or others who know the doctrine of Islam are forbidden under direct orders to speak to law enforcement in this state. The only ones allowed to speak to law enforcement about Islam is the American Muslim Advisory Council, which is a Muslim Brotherhood operation. Well, I read in the paper and heard some people say that this was a senseless killing here in Chattanooga. Funny. It made perfect sense to me. But law enforcement is like, I don't know. What do you think happened? We hear that Islamic State is not Islamic. Islamic State is 100% Islamic. Everything they do is justified by Hadith, Sirah, and Quran. And the Caliph, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, always gives a little writing, or someone does it for him, as to why, for instance, sex slaves are part of Islam. But not knowing that that is a lie is losing a battle. I do a radio show in Nashville, Tennessee from 11 to 12 every Friday. I'm a guest. The host is on for 3 hours every day, 5 days a week. The segment that I'm on is the most popular segment he runs. Here's the problem. There's only one such program devoted in the entire United States. This is called Losing. The head of the Bible department of a large Christian university has stated in a book that I would never say that Christianity is a better religion than Islam. That's called losing. When a woman goes to her pastor and says, I'm dating a Muslim man, do you think it would be okay for me to marry him? And he says, oh yes, it will help bring the religions closer together. That's losing. By the way, later there was a divorce. The judge gave the children to the man. He left town the next week. That's losing. I went to see a very large Christian publisher. I was introduced, so I wasn't just a stranger walking in off the street. And they told me two things that were of great interest. Number one, they had no interest in Islam. They would never publish a book which would allow a pastor to understand the Quran. And they would never publish a book which would allow anybody to understand the Sunnah of Muhammad. That's losing. They then further went ahead and stated that Islam was collapsing in the United States and Europe. It would soon just go away anyway, and that the hope of Christianity was in China and Africa. That's called losing. There's something, one of Nashville, Tennessee's favorite indoor sports are religious interfaith dialogues. The first one that happened, asked the pastor, have you read the Quran? No. The rabbi, have you read the Quran? No. Ask the imam, have you read the Old Testament? Oh yes, I took a course in it. Have you read the New Testament? Oh yes, I took a course in it. That's called losing. Only the imam was prepared. In Slovakia, which is an atheist nation in Europe, has said to the EU about the refugees, send us the Christians. Keep your Muslims. That's an atheist nation. In the United States, we go, huh? That's called losing. By the way, do you know who's making the money off of bringing the refugees in? Christian churches. That's called losing. In the last election, how many of you asked any of the political candidates, where do you stand on the refugee issue? I'm not aware of anybody who did that. Well, of course I did. There's another problem. Nashville, Tennessee is called the buckle on the Bible Belt. Let me assure you that if that is true, the church's pants are down around its ankles. Why do I say that? Because you can be a Muslim and come to Middle Tennessee and your religion is totally safe. There won't be any Christian who's going to convert you. They're not even going to try. They're not going to bring the issue up. That's called losing. Well, there's some new textbooks that we're going to have here in the state of Tennessee. They're going to be educating our youth, and they exalt Islam and denigrate Christianity and barely mention it. The problem is when we analyzed these textbooks and spoke out about it, there was not a single pastor who became outraged. That's called losing. By the way, something that's beginning to happen is that Christian children are converting to Islam, both on the internet and because of contacts at school. And why shouldn't they? Because they're told by such things as the Bible teacher and their textbooks that, they're all the same. That's called losing. I organized a demonstration for the persecuted Christians in the Middle East. I announced it for 2 straight Fridays on my radio show. I got 40 people, 40. At an interfaith dialogue which occurs in Nashville, Tennessee, 400 will come. And when there was a bill that contemplated some limitation on the Sharia, 1,000 Muslims showed up. 1,000. They came from Memphis, they came from Jackson, they came from Chattanooga, they came from Nashville, they came from Knoxville. That's called winning. 40 people showed up to say something about the persecuted Christians. That's called losing. In the last presidential election, 3 out of 4 evangelicals did not vote. That's called losing. I said something to one Christian about the persecuted Copts. He says, they're not really Christians. That's called losing. So these are just little tactical losses, but they're very powerful, and we need to look at these, because if you're losing, you need to analyze how you're losing so that you can turn all those points around, because all of these things can be done better. So let's now go into what would winning look like. All right. This is another thing on losing. This is an event that's going to be held at Vanderbilt University. It's an all-day event. It's sponsored by the government, the university, big organizations, All the presenters are Christian. And this program, by the way, which will come out with heavy public relations, was put together by a Muslim Brotherhood representative who is a full-time lobbyist at the legislature. Now I want to point out some details here. The woman who's going to speak for Islam is a former Christian. All right? The General Stone who's going to speak is a Christian. He thinks that if you love Muslims enough, they'll love you back and everything's going to be good. He says we can reform Muslims. He, by the way, ran the prison in Iraq, which turned out most of the military officers for Islamic State. So that's how well his re-education campaign worked. He prepared the leaders, military leaders of Islamic State. Then we have a reverend, I forget what his name is, and he's all going to speak on Islam, what a wonderful thing it is. This is an inclusive community. Now then, see the little, to the side of the, I don't know if you can see, there's the brochure here that's on the web. And then I took and extracted this and put it over here. You see, there's Islam, put itself in the middle between the Christian and the Jew. And this is a lesson in Sharia law. The mosque is higher than the church. Sharia law demands that the mosque be higher than the church. I've been in churches in the Balkans in which you step down and go into a basement because under the Sharia rule of the Ottomans, a church couldn't be higher than a mosque, and so to get the necessary height they wanted on a church, they went and built into the stone. The first religious dialogue I went to was in, I think, a Presbyterian church. This symbology, by the way, means a lot to Islam. I don't know how much it means to you. But remember, Islam is based on dualism and submission, or dominance. This is the mosque dominating in the graphic. The second interfaith dialogue I went to, the imam came in. It was in a church. He took the Bible off the lectern and put the Quran on the lectern. Now, out of the people there, they had no idea what was going on. But he just asserted through the use of symbols that the Quran was superior to the Bible. And he did it in the church. The problem is that they didn't even know it was happening. Now then, how do we win our civilizational war? All schools must teach the Quran, the Sirah, and the Hadith. Not books about these. They must learn the actual material. We don't need an interpretation for our students. We need to make the Quran readable, which has been done by me and others. They need to study the Sirah, the life of Muhammad, and they need to study the Hadith. All schools need to teach this. Church schools, private schools, seminaries, they all need to know this. So what I'm about is I advocate knowledge about the doctrine of Islam based on the primary source text. Now then, we need to teach about the annihilation of Christianity. Did you know that Persia, which is now Iran, was half Christian? Iraq was Christian. Lebanon was Christian. Turkey was Christian. North Africa was Christian. Egypt was Christian. How did that all disappear? Where did it go to? We need to start teaching that history because it will teach us what the future is. Old saying, if you don't know the past, if you don't know history, you'll repeat it. So we need to know it so we don't repeat it. This is an odd one to throw in, but we need to teach the real history of slavery. The part that you got in school is about half right. There's another half, which is called Christian slaves, Hindu slaves, Buddhist slaves. So we need to study. What I advocate is that winning consists of learning. Now then, here's what would happen if we were going to win at this episode at Vanderbilt University. This is the same thing you saw before. It's all about our Muslim neighbor. Well, if we were really wanting to win, we would know Muhammad. He would be the perfect Muslim neighbor, right? He's the perfect Muslim, so he'd be the perfect Muslim neighbor. We would go to events like this armed with this knowledge, that Muhammad was a neighbor to the pagans, and he annihilated them. Muhammad was a neighbor to the Jews, and he annihilated them. Muhammad was a neighbor to Christians, and he destroyed them. And there were so few Christians in that Arabia, they had to leave Arabia to go to Syria to attack the Christians there. So that's what kind of a neighbor Muhammad was. And we would bring this information into this meeting. because what I've just told you will not be discussed. Instead, what will be discussed at this event is how terrible people like me are Islamophobes and we're the problem. So, once you have knowledge, you have to put it on the ground and start using it. The other thing is we would ask questions in this seminar. Our Muslim neighbors in Iraq, what's happened? They've turned on the Christian. Here's an example. Christians have said that Muslims they live next door to forever, ate at their house, they ate at our house. All of a sudden, with Islamic State, they're strangers. They rat them out. So that's what being a Muslim neighbor is meaning right now in the Middle East. We would bring these ideas into these multicultural interfaith dialogue, insisting that we discuss the entire truth. Winning civilizational war. Instead of putting a missionary on the airplane, you need to send him to the adjoining zip code. There's no sense to buy an airline ticket. Now then, this next line, this is all religious, by the way, and this is all the religious talk I'm going to do. A Pakistani Christian taught me this, because when you start talking about Islam and Muslims and Christians, the first thing they say is, oh, we got to love them. We got to love them. We can't hate. This Pakistani Christian who was raising his daughter's children, the reason she wasn't raising her children was she was killed in an act of jihad. He said, if you love a Muslim, take away his Quran. If you love a Muslim, take away his Muhammad. Now, he doesn't mean run up and grab the book out of their hand. He means take the Quran away by explaining to somebody what's in the Quran, the full details of it. Take Muhammad away by explaining the full details of who Muhammad is. Missionaries need to be taught what I call the Muslim Kafir Christian method. That is, if you want to convert a Muslim to Christ, don't start talking about Jesus. Start talking about Muhammad and Allah. Because very few Muslims know much about Muhammad or Allah. There's a book called Leaving Islam, written by Ibn Warwick. And in it, it gives enormous amount of detail about why Muslims leave Islam. It's always the same two reasons. They read the Quran or they read Muhammad. I just did an hour-and-a-half interview by a Kurd who out of Nashville, who is an apostate from Islam. You know how he became an apostate? He studied the Quran and read it all. So missionaries need to know this. And every teenager needs to be taught the Sirah, the life of Muhammad. This is a small version of it. To see if anyone could read it, I paid a teenager $20 to read that book and then gave her a little pop quiz. She could read it. So your teenagers can understand it too. Notice I didn't say read the Quran. The first thing you want to do is you want to read Muhammad. It's a story. It's a fantastic story. It's not boring at all. But once you get through with it, your daughters will never marry a Muslim, nor will your sons ever convert. That's quite a guarantee, isn't it? You know what? I've stood in churches and given this same statement before. Nobody comes up and buys any of the books. That's losing. Now then, did you all get a brochure, Voices for the Voiceless? How many people have this brochure? You didn't pay to get in, did you? I'm an advocate for this program. It's called Voices for the Voiceless. There's a website, and on this Voices for the Voiceless website, it discusses the greatest human rights crime in the world today, which is the persecution of Muslims, persecution of Christians in Muslim lands. Now, this brochure doesn't mention Islam, and it doesn't mention Muslims, because you see, I think you're probably too timid to carry a piece of paper around that had that on it. But this goes through and points out some facts. That the greatest human rights violation today is the persecution of religious minorities, and Christians are the largest by far. Half of Iraqi Christians have fled rather than die. Countless churches have been destroyed, some of them centuries and millennia old. Syrian towns that have been Christian for 2,000 years are being annihilated. The 1,300-year march of terror against the Copts in Egypt is still going on. Christians are jailed in Iran and tortured for preaching the gospel. And Christians and Hindus are persecuted to near annihilation in Pakistan. These are facts. I maintain that it is a moral duty of every Christian to speak on this issue, and that it needs to be done in a church. Okay? I believe, when I read the Gospels and the letters, that Christians are commanded to care for the persecuted. Do I have that right? Am I right here? Well, you have standing orders. What are you doing? This is a very simple program. But there are times when silence, and the church is silent. I say there's times when silence is evil. And I think that churches are evil, dabbling in evil, when they sit there and say, our mouth is zipped. We're not going to discuss this. So this is a program which I advocate. I say that the only virtuous position is to stand for the victim, break the silence, and oppose the oppressor. That's when I say oppose the oppressor. That's mean when I say at these interfaith dialogues, that somebody stand up and talk about this. We need to bring the persecuted Christians to America, and we need to start talking about their persecution. Voices for the voiceless. Here's things that you can do. You need to know the history of jihad against the Christians. It's in books. You need to study the history of the dhimmi, D-H-I-M-M-I. It is dhimmi that annihilates, being a dhimmi is what annihilates Christians. It's that precious protected status under Islam that gives you no civil rights. You need to know that history. Because Christianity did not disappear in Turkey because of jihad. It disappeared because of the Sharia, which put them under the dhimmi status. You need to read books on the Armenians, the Copts. These are stories that will make your heart weep. If you can't find anybody to bring to your church, then read. Start a reading club. In Nashville, we have local persecuted Christians. There are refugees that come in. I asked the Coptic bishop when he was in town, I said, what minister has ever met with a single Coptic priest? He said, well, none. I do a Skype broadcast on an Iraqi Christian station that broadcasts out of near Dearborn, Michigan. I asked Bassem, I said, so how many Iraqi Christians have been invited to tell their story at a church? He looked at me kind of puzzled. He said, well, nobody. That's wrong. That's wrong. Have a fixed time for prayer. Not just a casual thing, but that in the church there's some way in which you're always going to pray for the persecuted church. And study what's going on now. People are dying today because they profess Jesus. You need to study that, talk about it. Then there's people like me you can bring in. There's people like Noni Darwish. Bring in speakers. But you got to start doing something. We need to make our refugee policy a political issue. If atheist Slovakia can say, we want the Christians, can't Chattanooga do that? Why not? Make it a political issue. Right now the politicians know you don't care. Corker's not going to do anything. Lamar Alexander's not going to do anything. They're not going to do anything. You haven't made it an issue. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. Start squeaking. Make persecution a news item. Make persecution something you can talk about. You see, one of the things that happens is the reason I'm such a freak is because I'll talk about it. My problem was I was raised by an old woman. I was raised by my grandmother. This used to be a different nation. People were afraid of her. You know why? She always told it like it was. I'm her grandson. Maybe I can rub a little off on you. Talk about what's happening. Talk about it in your church. Hand out all brochures. This little brochure which doesn't mention Islam. If there's a meeting about Islam, go hand them out. But That wouldn't be nice. That's your problem. You're too nice. You're so concerned about being nice. You know, if the 12 apostles, 11 of them died as martyrs, if they'd have just been nice, they wouldn't have died. But Jesus was not a nice man. He was a kind man, but he wasn't a nice man. He was capable of righteous anger. Whatever happened to that? Whatever happened to moral indignation? Where'd that go to? Oh, now a friend of mine said, Bill, you're ahead of the gun. I don't think you got this handed out. This is a resolution condemning increasing global Christian persecution. This is a resolution, costs no dollars. The legislature is pretty good about passing them because it's no budget item. I want in the next legislature, the legislature to pass a resolution condemning the persecution of Christians on the globe. Do you think you could call a representative about that? Call a senator about that? I mean, I don't want to be too much of a burden on you. I know you want to do something. Oh, I know what you want to do. You want to send around an email. Let me tell you something. If emails could win a war, we're winners. If websites could win a war, we're winners. What I'm telling you is step away from the keyboard. Get in the room with somebody. That virtual world don't really make it. You need to be in the room with someone who's alive. I'm a scientist. I love graphs. I appear to be the first person who's ever put the collapse of Christianity in the Middle East in a graphical form. Turkey, you know, Turkey appears in the Bible. It's called Anatolia or Asia Minor. And there were 7 churches in Asia that the book of Revelation is addressed to. Does this sound familiar? Do you know what happened to those 7 churches? They're gone. This graph is the same graph that happens with every nation with Islam. Starts off, the blue line, it starts off at the bottom. There's hardly any of them. Notice what happens with time. And notice the time scale. The time scale is in centuries. You see, a disadvantage that we have, we're Americans, and we use a watch to tell time. Islam uses a calendar. It took centuries. But finally we arrive at what we have today, in which Turkey is 99.7% Muslim and 0.3% Christian. Lebanon was a Christian nation right after the Second World War. Do you know why it's a Muslim nation today? They opened their hearts and their doors to Muslim refugees. So today, Lebanon is an Islamic nation. It takes centuries, so I guess we don't have to worry about it. I'm the first person to ever ask this question. How many people have died in jihad? Isn't that odd? You all, if I give a pop quiz, how many Jews did Hitler kill? You'd all have a rough number that's probably close to right. You know that figure. How come you don't know how many Christians died? 60 million. How many Hindus died? 80 million. How many Buddhists? 10 million. How many Africans? 120 million. The tears of jihad are 270 million. Okay, these are 2 websites. One of them is run by a friend, and it deals with local politics, and the other one is more of a national look. Refugee Settlement Watch. Well, I've done my part, which is the easy part. I blow into town, do a few interviews, eat some food, spend the night in a motel. I'm back in Nashville in the morning. My job's done.
I'm sorry, is this the applause?
No. No. I've got a bit more. Your job needs to start. There's no magic mystery thing that's going to step out of the wings and save America and save Chattanooga. Ain't going to happen. At the top whether it's FBI, the governor, wherever else you go, the higher you go, the less they know. A sergeant out of Iraq understands Islam. The general, not so much. I find that in churches, the people in the pews know more about the person behind the pulpit. Oh, by the way, the Muslim Brotherhood stated at one of their conferences, I forget which group it was, that the broadest door into American society is the pulpit of the church. This event in Vanderbilt, these events that are ongoing with the interfaith dialogues. The problem is not that, the problem is we're not wanting to look at the fact we're losing. There were, on the train where they described them all as Marines in Europe, and I think they were not all Marines. I don't think any of them were Marines, actually, were they? To me, the critical thing happened when they realized that the guy had an AK, and one looked at the other and says, let's take him. How many people in this room, if I said I was going to go to this Vanderbilt conference, how many of you are ready to go in and take them? That's the problem. We're a nation of warriors in the past. You're going to have to put on the whole armor of God. You're going to have to maybe sing Onward Christian Soldiers. Is that still legal? You get busted? You need to adopt an attitude of this is important. It's important when your textbooks change. Because in that moment, a new America is being presented to new citizens. They may only be 16 years old now, but one day they'll vote. And you need to understand that the textbooks are critical and that they're lying and that you are silent. I've done my part, which is the easy part. Now you've got to do your part, and your part consists of getting the will to do something. Because these actions that I've all listed, not a one of them is hard. Having a prayer for the persecuted church, come on, you can do that. You just need the will. Starting a study group in your church or bringing in Christians from persecuted lands, you can do that. All these things are very doable. They're not outrageous, but you have to do them, which means you need the will to win. And on that, I'll stop. You need the will to win, and then we can win. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take a few minutes for questions, and here's what we're going to do. We've got a mic on that side and a mic on this side, and if you want to ask a question, come out to the aisle, if you would, from the row that you're on, and we'll give you 1 minute to ask a question, and we want it to be a question, not a statement, okay? So if you just hold up your hand. Yes, sir.
I think the problem in Europe is the demographic problems, and nobody's having children. The moral standards are low for the Christians. I mean, the Muslims are having 4 or 5 kids. The white native Europeans who are indigenous to the land are having no children. Multiculturalism does not work. That's how Rome disintegrated because of that, and Babylon. I mean, the immigration problem, I think, is probably the number one issue we need to focus on, and birth rate.
And your question?
How do we influence that in Europe?
Well, this is a personal answer. I've created a Center for the Study of Political Islam in Central Europe. We're translating my books into the major European languages. That's what I'm doing. But what we have is a certain malaise. There's a certain, well, whatever. I got mine. I'm going to coast out.
Nobody's having children, though. That's the problem.
Well, I did my part.
I'm the only young person here. I mean, there should be more young people here.
The man,
Because we're the ones who have to live this.
right. I can't, I don't, you haven't really asked a question. I'm sort of agreeing with you.
How do you influence that, into the culture, I guess?
You know what? I'm going to guess, since I'm standing in a church, I'm going to say that maybe the church needs to address that issue. And from the front of the room, too. Next question.
I agree with everything you said. Thanks for a very nice presentation. And but you listed all the people murdered in the name of Islam, and I agree with all that. However, isn't it also true that radical Islam actually kills more Muslims than anyone else?
I'm going to make two comments. He has something about radical. I drove down here to Nashville. From Nashville today, I did it at 70 miles an hour. That's the speed limit. If I'm doing the speed limit, I'm not radical. If someone is a jihadist, that's not radical. It follows the Medinan Quran. It follows the Sunnah Muhammad. 21% of the hadith by Bukhari are about jihad, of the sword. And so they're not radical. Let's get that out of the way. If you want to call them a kind of a Muslim, they're a Medinan Muslim. They practice the Quran of Medina. Let me say that again. They're not radical. They're not extreme. Islamic State is not radical. Islamic State is not extreme. If you're following the doctrine, it's not radical, it's not extreme, okay? Just want to make that point.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Oh, yeah. Now, let me get to this. I actually have a statistic for that. Are you surprised? I took and did a summation of the jihad. There's a wonderful website called thereligionofpeace.com, surely the most ironic title of any website, because all it does, it is a database of killing by jihadists. The figures go like this. They kill 2 Muslims for every kafir. Okay? So yes, you're right. They kill, as a matter of fact, Islamic State is killing more, what they say are not Muslims. Okay, Islamic State is following an old historical principle. When Muhammad died, the first caliph was Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr started killing Arabs. Those Arabs who said to him, we were Muslims when Muhammad was alive, but we're out of here now. Abu Bakr said, not so fast. And after killing several tens of thousands of Muslims, the remaining Muslim says, the Islam thing's beginning to work for us again. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the caliph of Islamic State in Iraq, is doing the same thing. There is a jihad of purification. He's killing apostates and hypocrites. So yes, you're right. But is it not ever thus? We have some law enforcement here. If I'm found dead in the kitchen, do you know the first person the cops are going to interview? My wife. Why? Because those who kill you are not usually strangers. They usually know you well, too well. So it's the same in the black community. I know there's a big ruckus about white cops killing young black males, but do you know who kills the average young black male? Another young black male. So is it surprising that Muslims, if they're going to kill mostly Muslims? I think not. But yes, you're right. The figure's 2 to 1. Next question.
Right here.
What is the level of success in our liberal colleges and universities of them targeting our young people at that impressionable age? And what percentage of our colleges and universities are now full of this doctrine that we have to deal with when we send our kids to our colleges and universities?
Well, I'm going to give you an example of a Christian college, university. It's called Lipscomb University. I'm just going to tell you what's going on there. You can leave Lipscomb University trained as a missionary and you'll know nothing about Islam. A history professor said in a class at Lipscomb, when a student said that Christians and Muslims don't worship the same God, he says, oh, yes, they do. And it was at Lipscomb University, the head of the Bible department said, I would never say that Christianity is a better religion than Islam. That's said at a Christian university. In the universities itself, Christianity is degraded, Islam is elevated. And no, they don't teach the kind of statistics that I teach here. So that's what's going on in the universities. I learned a little bit about this. I had a senator who was favorable to me, and she helped me to get a lot of catalogs from universities because I wanted to see what the answer to this question was. I learned something about the universities. No one's really controlling them anymore. Not even the senators. These are UT. Okay? The universities are off on their own course. That bit is in their mouth. No one controls them anymore. They have their own agendas at the top. So I don't know if I got around to answering your question, but that rambles around it. Next question.
Can you explain the word ISIL and why the folks in D.C. use that term, ISIL versus ISIS?
Islamic State in Iraq and Levant, as opposed to Islamic State. Actually, I think in the Arabic it's Daesh. I just call them Islamic State. But what you're talking about, I think the general thing is that the Levant does not include Israel, I think is the point you're getting to. And I think that's what it's usually based on, that it's another version of drawing the map of the Middle East and there's no Israel there. Next question.
Over here, Bill.
I was just going to ask, I know that we have a civilizational jihad, I guess, that the Muslim Brotherhood is brought about, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Do they do this in every country?
Mm-hmm.
And
Works well.
about how many years have they been doing this here in America?
The Muslim Brotherhood is, first off, an organization which I have a great deal of admiration for. I admire them for the simple reason they're so good, and we're so bad. They're as good as we are bad at civilizational war. And by the way, the concept of civilizational war comes from the Muslim Brotherhood. That's the term they call it. A civilizational jihad, and they will use our filthy hands, they will use our hands to destroy our accursed house or something like that. This is in the Muslim Brotherhood explanatory memo. Yes. The thing about the Muslim Brotherhood that I admire so much is this. When you read the explanatory memo, which was part of evidence presented in the Holy Land Foundation trial, they state who they are and all the different organizations, NATE, Muslim Student Association, and all these other organizations. I think there are 12 of them. And then they go through and they have an incredibly detailed strategic vision. The part that chills you is you read that this document was written over a decade ago and how much of it they are accomplishing. In that they said they were going to take over the textbooks, which they have done.
Since our education is a really critical piece, for those of us who would want to become active, what would be the way to approach, because I'm from Georgia, what would be the best way to approach to try to make this change?
You mean education?
In the educational system.
I pursue it along a couple of goals. One is I harangue the churches without success, but I harangue them anyway. Somebody's got to chew them. So I do that. I also advocate awareness of textbooks. And then I say that no matter whether you're homeschooling, private schooling, church schooling, or public schooling, you need to watch what their kids are being taught, because they're not being taught what you think. And other than that, I don't know. Let me explain something to you. I am not going to defeat political Islam. You need to understand this. I'm explaining this to you because you're Americans. Most of you look like Americans, I presume you are. And Americans have this primal myth. The one man comes into town with his skill in arms and courage, cleans up the town which the mob has taken over, and he rides out on his horse, and everything is now good. Okay? The Lone Ranger, right? Superman. Dirty Harry. These are all myths that we love. This hero who stands up against all of society and wins. It don't work. It takes an organization to do the job. The first thing that we have when you ask your question such as you are is you are an individual. So the first thing you need is people to work with. That's your first step. Heroes do not defeat armies. I don't care how much you like to think that they will. So that's your first step, is get that together. Next question.
Over here, Bill.
Good evening. Just for the benefit of the person that asked what is ISIL, if you Google it, it's an abbreviation, and for you, Doctor, of the Islamic State of Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, which is the L, it's not Lebanon, it's Lebanon.
I thought it was Levant. Sorry.
No, okay. All right. Now, I have two-part question quickly. One is based on the fact that the killer was an alcohol drinker, a drug user, and about to declare bankruptcy, which is not allowed in Islam, and he was not a devout Muslim. Why do you call him jihadist? Number two, other than your PhD in math and physics, do you hold any degree in credentials in psychology or the theology of any faith? Thank you.
I'll take the last question first. The answer is no. I happen to be a scientist who can read. I ask any person to bring me something and challenge me to understand it and say, I bet you can't understand this. Bring me the verse from the Quran that I cannot understand. Bring me the hadith that I cannot understand. Bring me the chapter of the Sirah that I cannot understand. Show me the chapter in a Sharia text that I cannot understand. I want to see these works because I will be amused. I'm capable of teaching myself, and I advocate that you do the same. Now then, with regards to what motivated the gentleman here, I'm using the duck theory. Walks like a duck, swims like a duck, looks like a duck, quacks like a duck. I'm going to call it a duck. Now then, so far as all the gentleman's problems, I have read the Quran. And what it says is, and by the way, sin before jihad was what Muhammad Atta and the jihadis before 9/11. Remember 9/11? They were out with whores and stripped girls and drinking whiskey. Because you see, they knew something. They were going to die on the morrow in jihad. Now, every Muslim, when they die, will suffer the punishment of the grave and the uncertainty of Judgment Day, except for the jihadist who dies as a martyr. And he goes directly to heaven, no matter what his sins. Next question.
So I know that the education system is being diluted, and I know especially because of all the teaching that they are doing on Islam and the fact that Christianity is really being rejected in our nation. But what I want to ask you is, without sounding political, but do you feel like in the last 7 years that Islam has been able to take a deeper hold on our colleges and schools and also our government systems because of our current president?
Well, he is grease on the rails, I'll admit that. But the first purging of knowledge of Islam from the Pentagon occurred under George Bush. My colleague Steve Coughlin was fired because a Muslim said he's a Christian who hates Muslims, and Bush had him fired. What I'm saying here is that I find less difference between Republicans and Democrats than many people.
The last two times, excuse me, the last two times I heard you talk, you made, I think, a much greater emphasis on what Muhammad was.
Mm-hmm.
And tonight, the only thing that I really heard you say was that Muhammad, as the perfect individual, is what Muslims should try to be. But he didn't really give a sense of how terrible he was. I don't think people understand how terrible he was, especially as an image to emulate.
Well, I always have a problem when I give a talk. I got 20 pounds of material and a 5-pound bag. I simply don't have enough time to put it all in. And I wanted to emphasize in this particular lecture that there were some things to be done. if you invite me back, and I'll give a lecture on Muhammad. But I think the one thing I did mention was this. He preached, these stats are worth repeating. This comes directly from the Sirah. He preached the religion of Islam for 13 years and converted 150 Muslims, Arabs, to Islam. He became a jihadist, and averaging an event of jihad every 6 weeks for the last 9 years of his life, he succeeded in his wildest dreams. He united the Arabian Peninsula under one king, ruler himself, and every Arab in the Hijaz became a Muslim. So I think that's enough of a summary right there. But I always face the problem of not what to put in, but what to take out.
Did one of your books talk about Muhammad and his life cycle?
He doesn't work for me. I sell 2 versions of his life, a short version and a long version. So you can read the life of Muhammad with my books. And by the way, my books are rather unusual. When I tell you something in the paragraph, all my paragraphs have an index number that refers you back to the original source text. So if you're reading along in my Muhammad and the Unbelievers or the life of Muhammad, and Muhammad says, kill every Jew you can lay your hands on, you go, oh, he wouldn't have said that. Well, that paragraph has an index number which will lead you back to the source material, and you can read it in greater detail. This is the essence of what my books are. I do not write about Islam. I write Islam. I don't comment on what Muhammad said. I tell you what he said. So that's the nature of my books.
The gentleman came in and he asked you a question. If the person on 16th of July was a jihadist, why did you call him jihadist?
Mm-hmm.
He was jihadist because he was intended to attack the military people, not on one place, but 2 places. That was his intention, to be considered as jihadist against the military force or the service people of this country. And he left his legacy, what he had done, as a jihadist. No, that is not my question, but that's the answer that you should have given him.
I stand corrected.
My question that I came here is that in European countries, that they have found out, they had welcomed the Muslims in that society, but the Muslims are the one who despise and they hate the culture and the values of those cultures. They have come onto America. Americans have welcomed them. They hate the values and our customs, our traditions, our way of life, and our culture. Is no, I heard the politician like.
Can you ask your question, please?
Question. I'm going to ask the question after I make a statement. Trump, for instance, he tries to get the Mexicans out of this country. They are illegal, yes, but Mexicans are those people who really adopt this culture. They accept our values. They accept our way of life very much. No problem in that. Muslims have come in this country.
Sir, can you please ask your question?
Okay, question is this. What would you suggest that Muslims, like in Spain, they were kicked out because of their political problems and not getting along with those? Should we, in the United States, somehow try to get rid of these people? They are legal, perhaps. Our government has allowed them to come, but we have come to the point when they can be a problem in our society. We need to get rid of that problem.
To do anything such as you suggest, there has to be a foundation under it. That foundation has to be knowledge. It is my job at this stage of my life and the stage of working in America is to simply educate what the doctrine and history of Islam is. I will not see the solutions come about. I'm an old man. So I'm doing what I can do and what I know best, which is to educate. I'm going to leave it to those who follow after me, once they're better educated, to make decisions, because there are decisions that will take care of the problem. I disagree with you on one thing. Muslims are not the problem. It is Islam that is the problem. Next question.
I've heard all my life that Muhammad was illiterate. Is that so?
A very interesting question. He says he's heard all of his life that Muhammad is illiterate, and indeed, there is a verse in the Quran which uses an Arabic word which can be translated as the unlettered prophet. I doubt this, and let me tell you why. He was a successful businessman who ran a camel caravan trader from Mecca to Syria. We know he spent quite a bit of time in Syria. As a businessman, he has to have invoices and bills of sale. I find it hard to believe that he didn't have some literacy, just simply on the basis of who he was. But then there's a hadith it's not from Bukhari, it's Abu Muslim, in which Muhammad is on his deathbed and he calls for a pen and paper. Who calls for a pen and paper? People who can write. So he may not have been highly skilled in the language, but I somehow or another doubt that that's exactly true. I think that it enhances his stature as a prophet if you say, well, he couldn't have read this stuff and repeated it, because you see the Quran has several peculiarities, one of which is it's highly repetitive, but its biggest problem is it is so derivative. You don't learn anything new when you read the Quran. The Quran of Mecca preaches one new truth: Muhammad is the prophet of God. The Medinan Quran preaches one new truth: if you don't believe that Muhammad is the prophet of God, then you can be harmed. So there's very little new material in the Quran. The bridge over hell, that comes from Zoroastrianism. If you've read Islam, if you've read religious text all your life, you go, oh, this comes from the Old Testament. Oh, this is a rabbinical teaching. So, next question.
What is the difference between a peaceful Muslim and a radical Muslim?
All right, we're going to go over the ground one more time. Well, I'm going to say that there's what you call radical Muslim, I'm going to say is a Muslim who follows the Medinan Quran. I prefer this because it is precise. It is the Muslim who obeys the Medinan Quran. Remember, 24% of the Medinan Quran consists of jihad. So I like to put it in that way. The Meccan Quran is purely religious. All right? There is no jihad in the Meccan Quran. Parts of the Meccan Quran are really quite strikingly beautiful. They're very poetic. So the difference is there are two Islams, early and late, Medina and Mecca. Which one do you practice? Now remember this, the man who practices the Medinan Quran, the Quran of jihad, is better and stronger than the man who does not. Next question.
If we're becoming a nation of pacifists, is it intimidation and shame that is the machine that's creating that?
You know, this is going to sound funny, but I think our biggest problem is we're too rich. If I decided I wanted to take over the town of Chattanooga, total, trust me, at my age, I ain't taking over this town. And I needed to get people with muscle and the ability to use guns. The first question I would ask is, where do the poor people live? Where do the rich people live? I wouldn't go to where the rich people are. They're useless, except for making more money. Okay? If I need brave people who are willing to bust some knuckles, I want a farmer. I want a guy who cuts grass. I want a man who does work with his muscles. My stepfather was a hero in the Second World War. A cattle farmer. He left Wayne County to go off to the Pacific. He did 3 landing invasions. You know the business? He drove a Browning 50 caliber and a Colt 50 caliber. He was kind of deaf. At his funeral, a full bird colonel showed up with a complete honor guard and news to the family we didn't know. He came within 1 letter of commendation to receiving a Congressional Medal of Honor. He was the most ordinary man you'll ever meet. He didn't ever say, make my day. He never started an argument with anybody. He was a country boy and a great war hero. So the point I'm making is, he was not rich or he wouldn't have done it. And I think that we suffer from too much wealth. I think life is too easy for us. Now, this is spoken by a guy who grew up 7 people in a 3-room shack. So see, I come from a point of view of coming from that part of the world.
Bill, I've got a question here.
Yeah.
First, let me introduce you to my friend Bassam Issa. He is also the president of the Islamic Society of Greater Chattanooga. He's got another question for you here.
Okay.
Just this one. Okay. Based on your theory that the Muslim jihadists, and you brought the example of September 11, Muhammad Atta, before he did what he did, he went the night before and drank and had a prostitute. And then this killer that did this heinous crime the other day, then wouldn't it be better to, and we advise the FBI to go to every bartender and make sure they ask everybody comes there if they're a Muslim and immediately call the FBI and then leave the other Muslims alone, please? Thank you.
Next.
Dr. Warner, thank you very much for your labors all these years, your work, your statistics, and I too have been a studier. We are on the civilization jihad clock. That clock is ticking faster and faster, and the time of the centuries is shrinking. So my question to you is, where do you see the population centers and forming, other than Dearborn, which we know about? What would you recommend to the refugee cities? What would you recommend to the population centers where the groups are beginning to exercise political power? As you know, we have 2 congressmen now in Washington who are Islamic. We have the problem growing, and it cannot be dismissed. And you have talked about the losses in losing. I'd like to hear you respond to the population centers of jihadists and so-called peaceful Muslims that are taking over politically. What do we do? And what does a city do?
Well, first off, we need to face the fact that we have a political problem. In Europe, over half the refugees on the 2nd generation are still on welfare. All right? Now, what we're told is all these new refugees are going to bring us enormous productivity, enormous work. But what we observe in Nashville is that as soon as their foot hits the ground, they're given briefings by the ACLU and everyone else as to what all their rights are, what programs they can sign up for. We're going to get you a new apartment. We're going to get you new clothes. We're going to get you food. We're going to get you medical care. We need to understand that we have a political problem if we simply can't keep doing that. We have a political problem in that we need to go to churches. Let me give you a real example of the problem. I spent some time with a Catholic bishop. I get to meet very interesting people, by the way, in what I do. I meet all kinds of people. I meet FBI, former, I meet just all kinds of people. I never thought I would have lunch with a Catholic bishop. And let me say, the 7-course meal was wonderful. Really, I didn't know the bishops ate so well. But anyway, he expressed his concern to me about the rise of Islam in America. Now, this same bishop is the same one who cashes a check of about $10 million a year profit for bringing Somalis into America. So what Bye. I think he had enough. Okay. Hope I look good. I worry about the editing process. So we have to understand that, deal with the source of the problem. The source of the problem is politicians who aren't being pressed on this issue, and then church leaders who are actually making money off of this issue. So I think that's places to start. And again, I bring out this point. You can't do it by yourself. You need an organization. I'm a
Bill?
lone gun. We need organization.
Bill, we've got 2 more questions over here. Do you have any more over there? Okay, we've got 4 more questions, but let's make them popcorn questions real quick, okay?
What's the difference between the Sunni and the Shiite? Why do they clash with one another? And is it relevant to our problem?
Okay. Remember, I came here tonight to speak to you about political Islam, which is the way Islam deals with the kafir. The Sunni and the Shia all agree on the kafir business. So from my standpoint, they're no different at all. Now they differ. Where they differ is who can be the caliph. They differ in some minor theological points of view, what the final days will actually be like and everything. But as far as you and I are concerned, there's not a lot of difference. Next question.
For those who are taking up the gauntlet and wanting to move this ball forward, is there a workbook? Do small groups need workbooks? Is there one available? Have you produced one? Or is it just enough to read what you suggested we read first and go through it?
She doesn't work for me, but she could. I'm an intellectual. I love to learn. I've got book after book after book, and I just devour books. However, I'm also a freak. Okay? So, for all of you who do not spend your days and nights reading, I prepared a course. It consists of a little bitty Quran, a little bitty Sirah, and a little bitty Hadith, and then the CDs are a lecture which orients you to these 3 books. I also sell another self-study course which is in blue. This is the theory. The blue is a 3-level course that studies the application. So one's like a theoretical text and the other's like an engineering text. They were designed for the purpose of teaching. So I've tried to lay this out. Now coming down here, and I've also had it a second time today, I got into the video business. I have a web channel on YouTube called Political Islam. It's just Political Islam. And I got into this, and they're here today, somewhere lurking in the... Hi. They came in and videoed me when I gave a lecture called Why We Are Afraid. And they asked if they could put the video on YouTube, and I says, rolling my eyes, sure, but nobody is going to watch a 45-minute history lecture. We got 100,000 views in the first month. It's got over 2 million views on their website alone. It's been subtitled in 12 languages. The short of it was, I suddenly went, why am I writing newsletters? I'm such a good-looking guy, people just want to see me. So I started making short videos. So the call I got today was from a guy, and I had it a second time today, so I'm going to do it, is he taught this course. But he said, Bill, you need to prepare a series of lectures. So I'm going to do a series of video lectures. Stay tuned.
Over here, Bill.
Thank you for being here. And I've read 2 or 3 of your books, and I remember in
But you need to read more.
And I remember in one of them you had said that when population centers exceed 5% of Muslims, that's when the jihad is supposed to start. And I was thinking probably Dearborn might be one of those areas, or maybe there are resettlement areas, and they have begun Sharia law in those places. Can you enumerate and tell us where those places are?
I didn't know that I included that fact in any of my books, so I'm sort of like, First off, I'm greatly concerned with the rise of Sharia. Now, although the title of my book says Sharia law for the non-Muslims, I said Sharia law because I need it to be understandable to you for you to open the book. Sharia is far, far more than a law. It's an entire way of life. It's how to pray. It's how to go to the bathroom. It's how to say hello. It's how to make love. It's there is how to. I don't know if there's nothing in your life that it doesn't include. What this gets around to is this: is that we're already implementing Sharia law in this country, but it's implicit. For instance, it is slander under the Sharia to say something that a Muslim doesn't like. Well, a lot of Muslims don't like what I say, so I'm slandering Islam. But most people will just not say something because they don't want to offend anybody, particularly a Muslim. So I'm greatly concerned about the rise of Sharia. Islam is the most brilliant war system known to man. It uses food as a way to advance civilizational war. I was telling the sheriff who's here that he will soon have a knock on his door. It'll start with a letter stating that Muslim prisoners must be served halal food. So it's the spread of Sharia. This business of you can't draw Muhammad, that violates the Sharia. So, well, I wander on. Next question.
Being a young adult, I have many conversations with other young adults about Islam over the years. Help me source to these guys that I'm talking to where jihad started. They seem to think that maybe the 1960s was where it really started. It was because of America. That's how they justify it. America bombing other countries or being involved in their politics. That's the typical college response you get. And I'm sure you being a professor, you may have heard that. So help me source to these young adults where jihad started. And you pointed some of these things out in your slides.
Well, we can first start with the fact that the first jihadist was Muhammad. And believe it or not, this was before America even existed, much less had a foreign policy. All right. The collapse of the Middle East came at the hands of jihadists, and this was before America had a policy. So it's a 1,400-year-old process. Now, what happened is that for a period of time, and this is the reason it seems modern, the Kafirs dominated the Middle East. The French, the English, and so what happened is that they suppressed a great deal of Sharia law. All right? It was no longer acceptable to kill Jews. Then we have withdrawn. There are no more colonies anymore. And so what is happening is Islam is returning to its true roots. And that's the reason we see the rise of jihad after the Second World War. So it may seem like a modern invention, but it is actually a resurgence. You see, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed and the last caliph, I think that was in 1922, that's the Muslim Brotherhood's starting point in their reasoning. Islam must have a caliph, and so they're to bring that about. So what seems like modernness is just a modern adaptation of an ancient system of law. So that's the answer. I think that was two questions, and I think we're over
That was
now.
it? Yep.
I think that's it.
That was it. Okay, everyone, help me thank Dr. Bill Warner for coming tonight. Good job. Really good. Appreciate it.
I think they liked it.